Hey, third graders, we're going to continue with equivalent fractions today. And I just wanted to remind you of this chart that we looked at the last time, showing that an equivalent fraction is are fractions that name the same part of a whole. So we looked at these fraction strips, right, or fraction bars, and then these circles. And today we're going to talk a little bit about how we can show equivalent fractions on number lines. We've looked at number lines before. So take a look at the bottom now of my chart. I've added something to it. Okay, I've got two separate number lines, right? You'll notice that the first one on top is in two equal parts. So each part, right, is 1/2. I have 1 hop and 2 hops. And remember, at the end here, my whole would be the same as 2 halves, right? When the number on the top and the bottom are the same, that means it's a whole fraction. Look at the one underneath it. The number line is the same exact length. So remember thinking about a piece of licorice. Okay, I've got 2 pieces of licorice, but the bottom piece of licorice is now in 4 parts because there are 4 hops. My denominator tells me that, right? I start at 0. When I hop once, that's 1/4. I hop a second time, that's 2/4. A third time is 3/4. And a fourth time would be 4/4, or 1 whole, right? When they're the same on the top and the bottom, that means 1 whole. So today we're going to look in our math journal, and we're going to start to notice how we can do equivalent fractions on a number line as well. Because if you look at these two right here, they are at the same point on this number line. Because remember, they're the exact same length. Okay, so those two line up. So 1/2 is the same as 2/4. That's exactly what we've done here in a circle and here in a fraction strip. Okay, now we're just going to do it on a number line. So we're going to break apart our number lines. So I want you to get your math journal out, and we're going to look at page number 337 in your math journal, right there at the bottom, 337. You can pause the video to find that if you need to. We're going to get started, and we're going to look just at this page today. All right, so at the very top, we've got our vocabulary beaver, but he doesn't have anything to tell us today because we already know what an equivalent fraction is. Remember, we looked at our vocabulary card, and on the back it said fractions that name the same amount, which is exactly what we had on our chart there. Okay, so let's look at these fraction number lines. Okay, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. We're going to have to find all of the fractions on a number line. You'll notice they're all the same length. They all are 1 piece, so 1 licorice piece. Okay, they all have a number 0 because it starts at 0 and it ends at 1 whole, right? We know that at the very beginning we have 0 of anything, right? This one says halves. So that's why my denominator is a 2, because when something is in half, it's in 2 equal parts. So we're going to take this number line, right, and we're going to try to find 1/2. It's only going to be in 2 parts, right? So we need to find right in the middle. So we're going to try to mark as close to the center as we can. I'm going to put it about right there, and I'm going to label that 1/2, right? This is 1 hop, 2 hops. So my whole down here, my fraction would be 2 halves. Not just 1/2, but I have 2 hops. Okay, so when I'm counting 1, 2, that should match my denominator, right? That's what tells me how many pieces my whole will be put into. And this is just a number line, so it's not anything different than any other shape. It just looks a little bit different. So look at the next one. It's in thirds. Here's 0/3. Here's 1/3. Now we need to figure out where 2/3 will fall on this number line. I always have my fingers and my hands with me, right? I've got a pencil right now. I can take my finger and I'm going to kind of measure. So I'm going to put my finger right towards the edge there. And where would I kind of mark my finger? If I'm looking at where this whole piece is or how long it is, it's kind of about to right here. So I'm going to take my finger and mark that spot and say that I think that's about 2/3. Right, here's 1/3, 2/3. Oops, this would be 3/3 or 1/2. Okay, do you see how I did that? I kind of looked at how long that space was. I could do it like this with my pencil, right? And I could mark and have that same spot on my number line. So now this one has a denominator of 4. So I know that this number line is going to be in 4 equal pieces. Okay, here's my pencil. And if I look, right, it's about that long. So I'm going to now take my eraser and move it down like that and mark that spot on my number line. So that's going to be 2/4. Okay, same thing. The same distance from here to about here is going to be my next spot on my number line, 3/4. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to check. Did I count and make the right number of hops? This tells me I have 4 equal pieces. Here's 1 piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces, 4 pieces. So my whole is going to be 4/4. This isn't anything new, right? You already know this. We're using these number lines because we're going to then take a look at equivalent fractions on these number lines. But first we have to do the work, all right? So here's 1/6. I could also take a sticky note or a piece of paper and I could mark and I could say, well, I think every unit fraction is about that length. So I could mark then here, here, here. So that's a little too far. Got a little ahead of myself there. But when I do it again, look I'm already at the end. They've already got that one marked for me. So 0/6, 1/6, 2/6, 3/6, 4/6, 5/6, and 6/6. Okay, remember your one whole piece, the numerator and the denominator should be the same number. So if you've got too many hops in there, you're going to have to go back and adjust that. Now this one is in 8 pieces because my denominator tells me, right, that it's in 8 pieces. So I'm going to erase that spot on my sticky note and I'm going to make a new mark. So this amount is a unit fraction. It's 1/8. And I'm going to add that to my number line until I run out of space or until I reach the whole. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to label it. And then we're going to do the work to show which fractions are equivalent or equal to each other. Okay, so you can see my marks and how I've divided that line up. And I'm going to make sure now 0/8, 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, and 8/8 is my whole. So I know that I've got the right number of pieces on my number line. Okay, if you need to freeze or pause the video to finish your drawing, you can do that. We're going to answer some questions at the bottom of our page to prove that these fractions, some of them are equivalent or the same as other fractions. Okay, so if I look at number 2, it says to write an equivalence chain with fractions that equal 2 halves. So a chain, you know what a chain is. Sometimes we make them to count down, right? We take strips. We use my fraction strips. We might take a strip, right, and glue it or staple it. Then we put another one on the inside, right, and glue that or staple that. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing, writing fractions, equivalent fractions, in a chain like this. We're going to show that they're equal to one another. And they have to equal 2 halves. Okay, so let's find 2 halves. You know that when the number on the top and the number on the bottom are the same, that's a whole. So look at all of these fractions take up the same amount, right, of the whole. So to write a fraction chain or an equivalence chain, I'm going to start with my 2 halves, and I'm going to say that that's equal to 3/3, because it is. And that's also equal to 4/4. And it's also equal to 6/6. What would the last one be? You are right, 8/8, right? Because these are all one whole, but the fractions are different because the number lines are broken up into a different number of pieces. Okay, so this is an equivalence chain showing that this equals this, and it equals this, and it equals this, and it equals this. They all are the same amount of a whole, but they're using a different fraction. Okay, so let's look at number 3. It says, why are the fractions in the equivalence chain 2 halves equal? Think about that. Why are they equal? Well, we could say, right, they're all at the same point on a number line. They're all at the point for 1, right? They all show one whole on a number line. So let's write that down. They all, let's say represent. That's a better word. They all represent one whole on the number line. And then I'm also going to write something else underneath that, right? Their lengths, how long they are, they're all the same. Their lengths are all the same, right? So that makes them equal. Okay, and then the last one says, why does the length of unit fractions grow smaller as their denominators get larger? Okay, so remember, unit fraction, right, always has a number 1 on the top. So let's look. Here's a unit fraction. Here's a unit fraction, right? A unit fraction always has a 1 on the top. So it's asking us, right, why does the length get smaller even though the number on the bottom gets bigger? Right? What's happening to the size of the piece? Right? So even though when the denominator is bigger, it's a smaller piece. So let's say when the denominator, and you should know that's the bottom number, when the denominator grows, the piece gets smaller, right? Because the whole ends up being in more pieces. If the denominator is 8, this has to be in 8 pieces. But if the denominator is 3, well, that one only has to be in 3 pieces. Okay, so those pieces are going to be bigger. So as that denominator grows or gets larger, right, that piece gets smaller. Okay, so freeze and pause the video so that you can finish writing all of this down before we flip the page and we actually show how some fractions are equivalent on a number line. Okay, so we're going to look at the back side, page 338. Okay, and it says to use our number line from page 337, so the previous page. So we're going to have to do a little flipping back and forth, okay, to write some equivalence chains. You know that equivalence chain has those equal signs in between. So we're going to start with this one. It says, what fractions are equal to 1/2? So let's look back and see all the ones that take up the same amount as 1/2. So it's right here. Okay, so anything in that same line takes up the same amount of the whole. So 1/2 is the same as 2/4. And it's the same as 3/6. And it's the same as 4/8. Okay, so let's write those down. Okay, you can see they're all taking up the exact same amount of a whole, but the fractions are different. So we're going to write that on here. We're going to write 1/2 equals, or is the same as, 2/4, which is the same as 3/6 and is the same as 4/8, right? We could prove that with our fraction strips, but now we're just showing it on a number line. It's the exact same concept. It's just that they're not kind of thick, right? That we're going to use that skinny number line. Could we use our fraction strips to do the same thing? We sure could. Let's try it with the next one. What fractions, or with fractions that equal 1/3? Okay, so thinking about what's the same as 1/3. Let's look on our page previous, and let's try to prove it with our fraction strips. So here's 1/3. Okay, I want to look and see what fractions take up the same amount. So I'm just going to look straight down and decide. Okay. Well, that froze there for a minute.